I've been driving a city bus for almost 30 years. 30 years of the same hiss from the air brakes, the same rumble of the engine under my feet, the same faces getting on and off, day in and day out. Frank's the name. Most people who ride my route just know me as the driver. That's fine by me. After 3 decades, you learn to appreciate a bit of anonymity. It's a shield. You see a lot of things from this elevated seat, things you'd rather forget, and it helps to just be a uniform and a pair of hands on a big steering wheel. This was one of those nights where the job felt every one of its 30 years. The last run of the day, the 11:45 p.m. express from downtown out to the sticks, to the new-ish suburban developments where the streetlights are few and far between. It had been raining all evening, not a downpour, but a miserable, persistent drizzle that made the asphalt shine like polished obsidian and turned every headlight into a blurry star. The wipers kept a steady, hypnotic rhythm, swish thump, a lonely metronome for a city winding down. The bus was empty, which wasn't unusual for this time of night, on this particular route. It was my favorite part of the shift, honestly. Just me, the bus, and the empty road home. It was a kind of peace, a boring, predictable peace, but peace nonetheless. The kind you work your whole life for, I guess. The route starts in the heart of the city, where the buildings are still lit up and there's a ghost of the daytime hustle. But by the time I'm 20 minutes in, all that fades away. The skyscrapers give way to low-slung office parks, then strip malls with darkened storefronts, and finally, just long stretches of 2-lane road flanked by thick woods. That's where the world gets quiet. The only sounds are my engine, my wipers, and the occasional sigh of the suspension as I hit a pothole. It's a route I could drive in my sleep. Every turn, every stop, every tricky intersection is burned into my muscle memory. That night, I was on autopilot, my mind already at home, thinking about the leftover meatloaf in the fridge and the last 20 minutes of the game I'd recorded. I was maybe 3 stops from the end of the line, deep into the residential dead zone, when I saw him. The stop was at the corner of an unlit side street, marked only by a simple metal sign. The only light came from a single, weak street lamp across the road that flickered and buzzed like a dying insect. Standing under it, just a solitary shape in the gloom, I almost drove right past. My brain had already checked out for the night, and seeing anyone at the Crestwood and 4th stop after 11 was rare enough to be a statistical anomaly. But some flicker of professional duty caught my eye, and I eased my foot off the gas, the bus groaning in protest as I pulled to the curb. The doors hissed open, letting in a gust of damp, cool air that smelled of wet leaves and asphalt. He came up the steps without a sound. He was young, I think. Hard to tell. He wore a dark, oversized hoodie, and the hood was pulled so far forward that his entire face was cast in shadow. All I could really make out was the line of his jaw and a tightly shut mouth. No hello, no nod, no eye contact. Just silence. He reached a hand out, and this is the first thing that really felt off. His hand was pale, the fingers long and thin, and it was empty. He just held it out. I pointed to the fare box. He didn't seem to understand at first, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small, crumpled handful of change and a few dollar bills. He didn't drop them into the box. He flattened the bills out on the tray next to me and placed the coins down one by one. I glanced down at the money as he passed. The bills were old and felt damp. Not like they'd just gotten wet in the rain, but like they'd been sitting in a musty basement for years. It was a strange, clammy feeling that made the back of my neck prickle. I pushed the thought away. Kid probably just got caught in the rain, maybe he's having a bad night. You learn not to judge. You see all kinds. Just you tonight? I asked, trying to break the heavy silence. My voice sounded too loud in the empty bus. He didn't answer. I wasn't even sure he heard me. He just turned and walked down the aisle. He didn't stumble with the motion of the bus like most people do. His steps were steady, measured. He went all the way to the back, to the very last row of seats that sits elevated over the engine block, and sat down in the corner, melting into the shadows. I watched him in the big rearview mirror above my head until he was just a dark shape against the darker window. So I pulled back onto the road. Swish thump went the wipers. The rumble of the engine filled the quiet again. But it wasn't the same comfortable quiet as before. Now there was an awareness. A presence. I had a passenger. One single passenger, sitting in the darkest part of the bus, as silent as a stone. My mind started to race, trying to categorize him, to put him in a box so I could stop thinking about it. Maybe he was a student from the community college a few miles back, studying late. Maybe he worked a late shift at one of the few all-night diners. But he didn't have a backpack. He didn't look tired, not in the way I was tired. There was an energy to his stillness, if that makes any sense. It felt intentional. You know, in 30 years, I've had drunks, I've had people arguing on their phones, I've had teenagers making out in the back, I've had people fall asleep and miss their stop, I've had every kind of loud and messy and human thing you can imagine. Silence is rare, and this kind of silence was something else entirely. It was heavy, it felt like it was listening. I kept driving, my eyes flicking up to the rearview mirror more often than I'd admit. The road ahead was a black tunnel punctuated by the occasional pair of reflective street signs. Inside the bus, the only lights were the soft green glow from my dashboard and the faint, spaced-out fluorescent tubes overhead, which always seemed to leave the back half of the bus in a kind of permanent twilight. Each time I looked back, he was in the exact same position. Perfectly still. It was starting to get to me. People fidget, they look at their phones, they stare out the window, they scratch their nose, they shift in their seat. This person did none of those things. He just sat there, a silhouette with his head facing forward, hands on his lap. I couldn't see if his eyes were open or closed. The posture was ramrod straight. It wasn't the posture of someone relaxing or sleeping. It was the posture of something waiting. I passed the second to last stop. No one, just an empty shelter and more rain. Now it was just one more stop to go. The end of the line, the terminal, which was really just a big, paved loop in a desolate patch of land next to the bus depot. My skin was crawling. I tried to tell myself I was being ridiculous. I was an old man, tired, letting his imagination run away with him on a spooky night. It was just a kid in a hoodie, but my hands were gripping the steering wheel a little too tight. My foot felt heavy on the accelerator, like it wanted to press down, to just get this trip over with. I forced myself to take one more look in the mirror. A long, deliberate look this time. I wanted to catch him moving, to see a sign of normal human life that would put my stupid fears to rest. I stared at the reflection, past the empty rows of vinyl seats, to the dark corner in the back. And that's when the cold dread solidified in my stomach. He hadn't moved a single inch. Not a millimeter. The angle of his head, the set of his shoulders, everything was identical to how he'd been when he first sat down. It was profoundly, fundamentally wrong. He wasn't like a person asleep. He was like a statue. Or a store mannequin someone had dressed in a hoodie and placed on the back seat of my bus as some kind of sick joke. He just sat there, a black hole in human form, absorbing the light and the sound and the peace of my bus, waiting for the one final stop at the end of the world. So there I was, driving a metal box through the rain with what felt like a ghost sitting in the back. My mind was doing its best to slap some sense into me. Frank, you're 52 years old. You're tired. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. The kid's just asleep, dead to the world. A lot of people sleep like a log. But my gut, the one I'd learned to trust over 30 years on these roads, was telling me something different. It was screaming, in fact. The bus rumbled on. We left the last of the suburban glow behind us, plunging into the part of the route I usually loved for its quiet. Now, the quiet was a weapon. The swish thump of the wipers was too loud, the hum of the engine too low. Every little groan of the bus's frame, every rattle from an old window pane, sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Because behind those sounds, there was nothing. No cough, no shifting of weight on the vinyl seat, no rustle of a jacket. Absolutely nothing. The silence from the back of the bus was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was the kind of silence that isn't just an absence of noise, but a presence of its own. I kept my eyes on the road, but my brain was locked on the rearview mirror. It was a compulsion, a quick, 2-second glance. The dark shape in the hoodie was still there, head forward, unmoving. Another mile, another glance, identical. The road curved sharply to the left. The whole bus leaned with the momentum, the loose change in the fare box rattling against the plastic. I braced myself automatically. Anyone, even sleeping, would have shifted, maybe listed to the side with the turn. I flicked my eyes up. Nothing, not a single degree of change. He was still bolt upright, a perfect 90-degree angle to the seat, as if gravity only worked on the bus and not on him. Okay, that was it. That just wasn't possible. This wasn't sleep. This was something else. My heart started doing a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was as dry as sandpaper. My hands, which had been loose on the big steering wheel, were now clamped down, my knuckles showing white under the green glow of the dashboard. I'm an old school guy. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters. I believe in drunks, psychos, and kids on drugs. That's the holy trinity of a bus driver's problems. And right now, I was leaning hard into the psycho category. Maybe he was on something, some new street junk that made you catatonic. That had to be it. It was a logical, real-world explanation. It was still terrifying, but it was an explanation I could wrap my head around. A person, a dangerous person, was on my bus. Not a ghoul. To test the theory, I coughed. A loud, fake, obnoxious bark of a cough. The kind that would make anyone jump. Ahem. Har oomph. I followed it up by fiddling with the rearview mirror, making the plastic joint squeak in protest. I was trying to break the spell, to get any kind of reaction that would prove there was a normal person back there. A flinch, a head turn, anything. The response was the same profound, absolute stillness. He didn't even seem to be breathing. For all I knew, there was just an empty hoodie back there, propped up somehow. But I knew that wasn't true. I'd seen him walk on. I'd felt the weird clamminess of his fair money. The bus was my kingdom, my territory. For 8, 10, 12 hours a day, this was my office, my domain. I was the captain of the ship. But now, I felt like a trespasser. That thing in the back owned the space. It had sucked all the air out, all the normalcy, and replaced it with a creeping dread. The 15 feet between my driver's seat and that back row felt like a mile-long, uncrossable chasm. We were coming up on an empty intersection with a stop sign. The road was slick, nobody around for miles. It was a stupid idea. The kind of idea that comes to you when you're desperate and fear is starting to chew on your sanity. But I had to know. I had to be sure. I checked my mirrors, the side ones this time. Empty road, dark trees, rain. I waited until I was almost at the white line, then I stomped on the brake. Not a full-blown emergency stop, but way harder than I needed to. The bus lurched, groaning in protest. The air brakes hissed loudly. A stray newspaper on the floor slid all the way to the front. My own body was thrown forward against the seatbelt. It was a violent, jarring motion. No one, and I mean no one, could sleep through that without being thrown around like a rag doll. My head snapped up to the rearview mirror. My breath caught in my throat. He hadn't moved. He had not moved. Not a tremor, not a shift, not a single fucking millimeter. It was as if he were bolted to the chassis of the bus itself. The cold dread I'd been feeling flash froze into pure, undiluted terror. Every rational explanation evaporated. Every excuse my brain had cooked up turned to smoke. This was not a person. Not a normal one, anyway. The hairs on the back of my neck and on my arms stood up so straight they hurt. My skin felt tight. I took my foot off the brake, my leg trembling, and eased down on the accelerator. The bus started rolling again, but everything had changed. The game was over. I wasn't just annoyed or creeped out anymore. I was scared. The kind of scared I hadn't been since I was a kid who was sure something was living under his bed. This wasn't a trip I needed to finish anymore. It was a situation I needed to survive. The end of the line was a terminal loop next to the main depot. It's not a station, not really. It's just a wide, paved circle in the middle of a massive, empty lot, surrounded by a chain-link fence. At this hour, it would be completely deserted. The depot building itself would be dark, with only a few security lights casting long, weak shadows. No one would be there to see me pull in. No one would be there to help. My plan suddenly became very simple. I would pull into the loop, open the doors, and wait. If he got off, I'd floor it to the depot gate and call the cops. If he didn't get off, I honestly didn't know. What do you do? Do I have to go back there? Do I have to speak to it? Tell it to leave? The thought made a wave of nausea roll through me. The last half mile to the terminal was the longest of my life. Every sound the bus made was a monster in the dark. The road was just a black ribbon disappearing under my headlights. I didn't look in the mirror again. I couldn't. I just stared straight ahead, focusing on the yellow lines on the asphalt, praying for the sight of the depot fence. My world had shrunk to the space inside my windshield. I could see it now. The faint glint of the wet chain-link fence up ahead. The single, flickering orangish lamp that lit the entrance to the loop. I was almost there. A wave of relief, fragile as it was, washed over me. Just a few more seconds. I'll open the door, he'll get out, and this nightmare will be over. He has to get out. It's the end of the line. The bus slowed, my foot gentle on the brake as I made the wide turn into the desolate loop. Absolute silence reigned, the wipers beat their rhythm. The engine idled, the rain pattered softly on the metal roof. I was just about to bring the bus to a complete stop at the designated spot, my hand already moving toward the button to open the doors. Ting! The sound sliced through the silence like a shard of ice. It was sharp, cold, and unnaturally loud in the dead quiet. It wasn't the warm, friendly chime it was supposed to be. It sounded metallic, hostile, clinical. My head froze, my hand hovering over the controls. I forced myself to look up at the long, narrow panel above the windows where the "Stop Requested" sign lights up. All the way in the back of the bus, directly above the corner where the figure sat, a single, perfect rectangle of red was now glowing. A malevolent, crimson eye staring back at me through the length of the bus, painting the shadows around that final seat in a sickening, bloody light. The red light was like a drop of blood on a black and white photograph. It didn't just glow, it pulsed. A slow, steady beat, in time with the thumping in my own chest. For a second, all the terror drained out of me and was replaced by a kind of weary relief. Okay, so he was a real person. He wanted to get off. This was normal. This was what people did at the end of the line. The weirdness, the stillness, all of it. Maybe I had just imagined it. Maybe the kid was just profoundly strange. But he was a passenger, and he'd requested his stop. My job was simple. My hand, which had been frozen in midair, completed its journey. I pushed the big, black button that controlled the doors. With a satisfying hiss of hydraulics, the front and back doors folded open, letting in a gust of damp, cold air that smelled of rain and wet asphalt. The orange glow from the single security lamp outside spilled onto the steps, making the puddles on the ground shimmer. "Last stop," I said. My voice was a little rougher than I intended. "This is the end of the line." I waited. I expected to hear the telltale squeak of shoes on the vinyl floor, the rustle of a jacket, the sound of someone getting up from the back of the bus. Nothing, just the soft, rhythmic patter of rain on the roof and the low, steady hum of the idling engine. The wipers continued their slow, hypnotic sweep across the windshield. Swish, thump, swish, thump. The red light was still on. "Hey," I called out, louder this time. A bit of the annoyance I'd been bottling up started to leak out. I was tired. I was spooked. I just wanted to clock out, get in my car, and go home to a life that made sense. Terminal station. Everybody off. The silence that answered me was absolute. It was deeper than before. It felt defiant. The open doors seemed to be inviting the quiet of the empty lot into my bus, and the quiet was happy to move in. I looked in the long rearview mirror. The red light was the only thing I could see clearly, a single point of color in a world of gray shadows. The shape in the hoodie was still lost in the gloom of that back corner. I couldn't tell if he'd moved at all. This was ridiculous. I wasn't going to sit here all night playing games with some punk. Fear was one thing, but my patience only ran so deep. With a grunt, I killed the engine. The familiar rumble died, and the sudden, profound silence was jarring. The only sounds left were the rain and the ticking of the engine as it cooled. I unbuckled my seatbelt, the click echoed in the quiet, and pushed myself up from my seat. My legs felt stiff. "All right, pal, show's over." I spoke more to myself than to him, my voice a low grumble. I turned to face the length of the bus, and my heart did a painful little stutter step. The back seat was empty. Just empty. The dark green vinyl was slick and shiny under the faint emergency lights. There was no one there. No hoodie, no shape, no person. He was gone. My brain tried to catch up. For a moment, it just refused to process the information. The seat was empty, but he couldn't be. I hadn't heard a thing. The bus was a sealed metal box, and I was sitting right by the only exits. How could anyone, let alone the silent statue I'd been watching, get up and walk off without making a single sound? Did he get off at the stop before? No, that was impossible. I would have seen him. I would have heard the doors. And besides, the "Stop Requested" light was for this stop. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I grabbed the metal pole next to my seat to steady myself. Okay, Frank, think. There has to be a logical explanation. Maybe when I opened the doors, he was already standing there, right in the stairwell of the back exit, and he stepped off the second they opened. Maybe he was so quiet, so fast, that I just missed it. It seemed unlikely. Highly unlikely, but it was 1,000 times more likely than him vanishing into thin air. Yeah, that had to be it. He was a sneaky little weirdo. He'd slipped out. The nightmare was over. A surge of relief, so strong it made my knees weak, washed over me. He was gone. I was alone on my bus. But the relief didn't last, because as my eyes scanned the empty bus, they locked again on that glowing red rectangle at the back. It was still on, a stubborn, angry red. If he was gone, why was it still on? Those things are supposed to turn off when the doors open. It's part of the circuit. A simple, reliable mechanism I'd relied on for 30 years. A new feeling started to bubble up, pushing the relief aside. It was a cold, prickly annoyance. The kid had not only spooked me half to death, but he'd broken my bus in the process. Great, just another thing to report on the maintenance checklist. For God's sake, I muttered, starting down the aisle. The bus felt unnaturally long. Each step I took seemed to echo. My shoes made soft, squeaking sounds on the damp floor. I ran my hand along the tops of the empty seats as I walked, the cool vinyl a familiar, grounding sensation. Everything looked normal. A discarded newspaper here, a forgotten coffee cup there, the usual debris from a long day's work. I reached the back of the bus. It was colder back here. I could feel a definite chill in the air that wasn't just from the open doors way at the front. I stood over the empty seat, the one where he had been sitting. It looked just like any other seat. There was nothing on it, nothing under it. I crouched down, peering into the shadows on the floor. Dust bunnies, a gum wrapper, nothing. I straightened up and looked at the source of my irritation. The red plastic light panel. It glowed with an intensity that seemed wrong, painting the ceiling around it with a faint, bloody hue. The button itself, the little yellow rubber circle he must have pressed, was right below it. This was the final piece of the puzzle. I just needed to see if it was stuck. I reached up and pressed the button myself. It gave a soft, unsatisfying squish under my thumb. The red light stayed on. I pressed it again, harder this time. Nothing. I tried jiggling it, pushing it from the side. The light refused to go out. It was well and truly busted. It was as if the button was just a useless decoration, and the light behind it had a mind of its own. It was a declaration. I am here. I am not leaving. It was then that I felt it again, stronger this time. A draft, a genuinely cold stream of air, moving right down the back of my neck. It made no sense. I was at the very back of the bus. The doors were a good 40 feet away at the front. The windows were all sealed shut. They don't even open on these models. So where was the air coming from? It felt like standing next to an open window in winter. A chill that cut right through my thin work shirt and raised goosebumps on my arms. My eyes followed the feeling. I looked at the window next to the seat. Sealed tight. The other side, the same. My gaze drifted downwards, to the floor. Solid. Nothing. Then, slowly, logic forced my eyes upward. Directly above the back row of seats. There, on the ceiling, was the emergency escape hatch. A square piece of metal, about 2 feet by 2 feet, that was meant to be used only in a rollover or a fire. It was supposed to be bolted shut from the inside, secured with 4 heavy-duty latches that required a special tool to open. It was supposed to be sealed so tight against its rubber gasket that not even a drop of rain could get in. It was open, not wide open, but ajar, pushed up on one side, leaving a dark, narrow gap of about 5 or 6 inches. A black, rectangular slit leading to the rain-swept darkness of the roof. The cold air was pouring in from that gap. My blood ran cold. Every rational explanation I had desperately constructed in my mind crumbled into dust. He hadn't slipped out the back door. He hadn't vanished. The prickling on my skin, the stiffness in my neck, it wasn't just fear anymore. It was a primal, animal understanding of a threat. Of a predator. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. The impossible stillness in the seat. The way he didn't move an inch when I slammed on the brakes. He hadn't been sitting on the seat. He must have been braced somehow, his feet on the backrest, his hands on the ceiling. Preparing. He didn't get off the bus. He didn't disappear. A single, terrifying thought screamed through the sudden, roaring silence in my head. He went up. He climbed out of the hatch. He's on the roof. My mind didn't just go blank. It felt like a circuit breaker had been thrown, plunging my entire consciousness into a dark, humming void. The facts were all there, laid out like exhibits in a courtroom. The empty seat, the impossibly stubborn red light, the cold draft, the hatch cracked open like a broken seal on a tomb. He went up. He's on the roof. The thought wasn't a whisper, it was a physical blow, a solid punch to the base of my skull that made my vision swim. For 30 years, this bus had been my office, my little kingdom of steel and vinyl. I knew every rattle, every groan, every sticky spot on the floor. It was predictable, it was safe. Now, it was a cage, and the monster was on the outside, trying to figure out how to get in. How long I stood there, staring at that dark slit in the ceiling, I couldn't tell you. It might have been 5 seconds, it might have been a full minute. Time had stopped making sense. The only thing that existed was the rhythmic patter of the rain, the cold air pouring down onto my head, and the frantic, useless thumping of my own heart. My breath was trapped in my lungs, a lead weight I couldn't exhale. My legs, which had carried me up and down this aisle thousands of times, felt like they were bolted to the floor. I was a statue of an idiot, waiting to be shattered. Then, a new thought, sharp and clear, cut through the fog. The bus doors were still wide open. 40 feet away, a perfect, rectangular invitation to the outside world. To the parking lot, to my car, to home. That's what broke the spell. I didn't think. There was no plan. There was only a switch that flipped from frozen prey to fleeing animal. I spun around, my worn work shoes squeaking on the linoleum, and I ran. It wasn't a graceful run. It was a clumsy, stumbling lurch, my arms flailing, my eyes locked on the driver's seat like it was a life raft in a churning sea. The rows of empty seats blurred past me, silent witnesses to my terror. The air felt thick, heavy, as if I were running through water. Every step was an agony of effort. My lungs burned. Please, God, don't let him be fast. Don't let him drop down through the hatch behind me. Don't let me feel hands on my shoulders. I practically fell into my seat, the familiar worn cushioning offering zero comfort. It felt alien now, a trap. My hands, slick with a cold sweat I hadn't realized was there, fumbled at my belt, searching for the key ring I'd clipped there this morning. An eon ago, my fingers were clumsy, numb, like fat, useless sausages. I couldn't get a grip on the clip. Come on, come on, come on, I whispered, the words a dry rasp in my throat. My gaze darted from my fumbling hands to the rearview mirror, to the gaping black rectangle of the front door, then up to the rain-streaked windshield. Normal. Everything looked normal outside, just an empty, wet parking lot under a single, buzzing sodium lamp. Finally, my fingers closed around the cold metal of the keys. I yanked them free with a force that sent a sharp pain through my hip. I had them. My hand was shaking so violently the keys made a frantic, tinny jingle, a sound that seemed obscenely loud in the oppressive quiet. I lifted my hand, aiming the ignition key toward the slot in the steering column. My whole universe shrank to that small, dark hole. Just get the key in, Frank. Start the engine. Drive away. This will all be a bad dream. A story you tell the guys at the depot tomorrow, something to laugh about over stale coffee. That's when the world ended. Ram. The sound wasn't just on the roof. It was inside my head. It was a physical impact, a concussive blast that felt like a wrecking ball had been dropped directly onto the metal shell just inches above my skull. The entire chassis of the bus shuddered from the force of it. I screamed, a raw, strangled yelp torn from my throat, and the keys flew from my trembling hand, scattering across the rubber floor mat with a mocking clatter. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine. The sheer, unexpected violence of it was paralyzing. It wasn't the sound of a person landing. It was the sound of something heavy, something solid, something that had dropped from a great height with absolute, malicious intent. I was hunched over the steering wheel, my head tucked down, my arms wrapped around it as if that could protect me. My breath came in ragged, painful gasps. The ringing in my ears slowly subsided, replaced by the now deafening sound of my own blood roaring past my eardrums. The rain on the roof sounded different now. Not a gentle patter, but a nervous, incessant tapping. He hadn't been on the back of the roof. He must have been clinging to the edge, waiting. He had jumped. He had landed right over my head. And then I heard the other sound. It started at the back, just behind the point of impact. It was a low, grating noise. A deep, dragged-out scratching of metal on metal. Shriek! My blood turned to ice water. It wasn't the sound of footsteps. There was no rhythm, no cadence of a person walking. This was a slow, deliberate drag. A sound of immense pressure being applied, like someone was dragging a heavy anchor across the roof, or like something was crawling, something with claws made of steel, digging in with every inch of movement. Scrape. It stopped for a second. The silence that followed was a living thing, thick with dread. I stayed completely still, not even daring to breathe. My eyes were wide, staring at nothing, my ears straining to catch the slightest noise. Where was he? What was he doing? Schree. It was closer now, maybe 10 feet behind me. Slower this time, more deliberate. The sound vibrated down through the bus frame, a low hum I could feel in my teeth and in the bones of my hands clutching the wheel. He was moving forward. He was crawling from the middle of the bus toward the driver's cabin. Toward me. My mind, what was left of it, tried to make sense of it. Tried to build a picture of what was happening up there in the dark, in the rain. A man in a hoodie. Was he on his hands and knees? Was he lying flat, pulling himself forward with his arms? The image was grotesque, inhuman. Why wasn't he just walking? The scraping was an act of intimidation. It was a declaration. I am not like you. The normal rules of movement do not apply to me. And I am coming for you. Scrape. Xeet. Closer. Right behind my seat now. I could almost pinpoint the location. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if not seeing would make it not real. I could picture the metal groaning under the pressure, the paint being gouged away in long, ugly ribbons. A wave of nausea rolled through me. This was it. This was how I died. In an empty bus, in an empty lot, at the hands of some silent lunatic who crawled on roofs. My wife would wake up in the morning and wonder where I was. They'd find the bus. They'd find me. My eyes snapped open. The keys. They were on the floor, somewhere by my feet. The scraping continued, a tortuous, drawn-out symphony of dread. It was a predator's pace. Slow, patient, confident. There was no rush. He knew I was trapped. The open doors didn't matter anymore. To get to them, I'd have to stand up, turn my back on the front of the bus. I felt, with a certainty that defied all logic, that the moment I stood up, he would come through the windshield. Scraape. It was directly overhead now. The sound was a grinding, vibrating weight pressing down on my soul. I hunched lower, making myself as small as possible. I could feel him. I could feel his presence, a cold, heavy spot on the roof right above my head. My entire body was a single, rigid knot of terror. And then, it stopped. The silence that fell was absolute. It was 1,000 times worse than the noise. The grinding had been a distraction, something to focus the fear on. This silence was pure anticipation. It was the moment after the lightning flashes and before the thunder cracks. It was the held breath of the entire world, waiting. He was right there, inches away, separated only by a thin sheet of steel and fiberglass. He was directly above my head. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner trying to escape. My eyes were fixed on the top edge of the windshield, on the spot where the glass meets the roof. I listened with an intensity that made my ears ache. For a footstep, for a cough, for anything. There was nothing, just the rain, and the waiting, the terrible, terrible waiting. He was up there, in the darkness, being perfectly still. Just like he'd been in the backseat. He was waiting for me to do something. To move, to scream, to give him a reason. I sat there, a mouse frozen under the shadow of a hawk, knowing that the slightest twitch would mean the end. The silence stretched on, pulling the nerves in my neck and shoulders tighter and tighter until I thought I would snap. He was there, and he was waiting. That silence. I don't know how to explain a silence like that. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a thing. It was heavy. You could feel it pressing down on you, filling up all the space in the bus, getting in your ears and behind your eyes. The rain had become a gentle, almost apologetic tapping. The buzzing from the sodium lamp outside was a distant hum. Everything had fallen away except for the silence on the roof. I was a statue. My hands were still clenched around the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My neck ached from being locked in one position for so long. My brain started doing that stupid thing it does when it's terrified. It started to lie to me. Maybe he's gone. Maybe that scraping was him climbing down the back of the bus. Maybe he just ran off into the night. It was just a prank, a dumb kid trying to scare the old man. Any second now, I'll hear him and his buddies laughing from behind those trees over there. I held onto that thought like it was a life preserver. A prank, that's all. Just a really, really stupid prank. I even let out a little puff of air, a half laugh, trying to convince myself. Yeah, a prank. I forced my muscles to unlock. I told myself, just pick up the keys, Frank. Drive to the depot. You'll laugh about this tomorrow. My eyes darted down to the floor mat. I could see the glint of the keys near the brake pedal. Okay, easy. Just bend down in. A flicker of movement. It was at the very top of the windshield, right where the dark tint strip meets the roofline. It was so small, so insignificant, that I almost dismissed it as a trick of the light, a reflection of a raindrop. But it wasn't a raindrop. It was a smear of pale against the black. I froze, my hand hovering mid-air. My eyes were glued to that spot. It was perfectly still again. See? Nothing. Just your mind playing tricks on you, you old fool. I started to breathe again, a slow, careful inhale. And that's when the pale smear lowered. It moved down maybe an inch. Slowly, deliberately. It wasn't a smear. It wasn't a reflection. It was a forehead. My world, which had already shrunk to the size of the bus, now collapsed to the size of that pane of safety glass in front of me. Time seemed to stop. I watched, unable to scream, unable to move, as more of it came into view. It was like watching a photograph develop in some hellish darkroom. The forehead, then eyebrows, and then the eyes. They were upside down, two wide, dark eyes, staring straight down, through the glass, right at me. They weren't angry, they weren't crazy, they were just looking, like a scientist looking at a bug under a microscope. There was no expression, just a flat, black, empty focus. And in that moment, in those upside-down eyes, I knew this was not a prank. This was not a kid. This was something else. I should have screamed. I should have done something. But all the air had been vacuumed out of my lungs. I just sat there, my mouth hanging open, staring back at the face that was slowly descending into my line of sight. It was a man, I think. Or shaped like one. His face was slick with rain, his dark hair plastered to his scalp, hanging down past his chin. He was lying flat on the roof of my bus, his head hanging over the edge to look in at me. And then he smiled. It wasn't a human smile. Humans don't smile like that. It started at the corners of his upside-down mouth and just kept going. It was a wide, wet, silent slash in his face, pulling his lips back from his teeth in a grotesque crescent. It was a predator's smile. A shark's smile. It was a smile that said, I see you. And you are mine. That smile broke the spell. It was like a switch was thrown in my head, from frozen terror to pure, blind panic. A sound ripped out of my throat, a choked, gargling shriek that didn't sound like me. My body finally acted. I lunged down, my hands scrambling blindly on the floor mat, slapping at the rubber, searching for the keys. I could hear my own pathetic whimpering. Please, please, please. Bam! A fist hit the glass, right above his smiling face. The sound was a dull, solid thud that shuddered through the entire driver's cabin. It was so close, so violent. I flinched back so hard my head hit the headrest. My fingers finally closed around the key ring. It felt like grabbing a handful of ice. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't get a grip. Bam! Bam! 2 more hits, faster this time. Harder. I could hear the sound of the impact, a meaty thud of flesh and bone against reinforced glass. The smile never wavered. He just kept staring at me, those dead eyes locked on mine, as he pounded on his own reflection. It was the most insane thing I had ever seen. There was no rage in it. It was just methodical, purposeful, like he was trying to tenderize a piece of meat. I got the keys into my hand. I didn't even look. I just jammed my hand up towards the steering column, my whole body shaking. The keys rattled against the plastic housing. I couldn't guide them in. My fine motor skills were gone. My brain was screaming one thing, drive. Crack. That sound was different. It wasn't a dull thud. It was a sharp, sickening report. I risked a glance up. A small, star-shaped fracture had appeared in the glass, right where his fist was landing. It was a tiny thing, but it was a promise. A promise that the glass would not hold forever. He saw it too. His smile seemed to widen, if that was even possible. He drew his fist back slowly, deliberately, for the next strike. There was no time to call for help. My phone was in my jacket pocket, a million miles away. There was no one to scream for. The depot, safety, my wife, my life. It all came down to a single, simple action. Get the key in the damn hole. In that last second of clarity, that last moment before my brain shut off completely and let the animal take over, I saw the face change. The empty, watching expression was gone. In its place was a look of raw hunger, of anticipation. He knew he was about to get in. I shoved the key forward with a desperate, final surge of strength. It scraped, it missed, and then, with a sound more beautiful than any symphony, it clicked into the ignition slot. I didn't pause. I didn't think. I twisted my wrist and stomped my right foot down on the accelerator with every ounce of force I had. The old diesel engine, which usually coughed and sputtered to life, instead gave a deafening, instantaneous roar. The entire bus chassis bucked like a spurred horse. The tires screamed on the wet asphalt as they fought for grip. For a split second, everything was just noise and vibration. The pounding on the windshield was swallowed by the engine's bellow, and through that roar, I heard a new sound from above. It was a shriek, a high-pitched, surprised, inhuman scream of rage and shock. It wasn't the sound of a man. It was the sound of something furious at having its meal snatched away at the last possible second. The bus shot forward. I wasn't driving, I was just aiming. I gripped the wheel so hard my bones ached, my foot still mashed to the floor. The bus lurched out of the parking bay and onto the empty access road, gaining speed with a terrifying momentum. Then came the final sound. A sick, heavy thwump. It wasn't on the roof anymore. It was behind me. It was the sound of something heavy and solid hitting the road at high speed. A sack of wet cement. A side of beef falling off a truck. A body. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was screaming now, a continuous, breathless wail of terror and release. The bus was fishtailing on the slick road, but I didn't care. I wrestled with the wheel, my eyes wide and unblinking, staring into the rain-swept darkness ahead. Go, 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 don't stop, never stop. The depot lights were a distant, hazy promise somewhere in the blackness. That's all that mattered. My heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. My breath was coming in ragged, painful sobs. I was alive. I was getting away. The rational part of my brain was slowly beginning to crawl back out of its hiding place, whispering that I had done it, I had survived. And then my eyes flickered, just for a second, to the large rearview mirror inside the cabin. A reflex, born from 30 years of driving. I wasn't looking for him. I knew what I would see. An empty road stretching back into the rain. But that's not what I saw. My gaze went right past the reflection of the empty aisle. My eyes locked on something else. Something small, and square, and red. It was still lit up. Near the back of the bus, in the darkness, a single point of defiant, crimson light. The call button, the one he had pressed. Through the jarring motion of the speeding bus, through my own terror, it burned with a steady, malevolent glow. It wasn't just a light anymore. It looked like an eye. A single, red eye, watching me from the back of my own bus as I fled. And it wasn't going out. I don't know how long I drove like that. It felt like an hour, but it was probably only a few minutes. The world outside the windshield was just a smear of black and blurry lights, distorted by the rain and my own tears. The only things that were real were the roar of the diesel engine, the violent shaking of the steering wheel in my hands, and the sound of my own voice, making a continuous, high-pitched noise that was part scream, part sob. My foot was a lead weight on the accelerator. I didn't dare lift it. I was convinced that if the bus slowed down, even for a second, he'd somehow be right there beside me again, that his smiling, upside-down face would appear in the side window. The bus wasn't meant to go that fast. I could feel every bolt and rivet groaning in protest. When I saw the hazy orange glow of the depot in the distance, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me pass out washed over me. I wrestled the bus through the wide-open gates, not even slowing for the speed bumps, the chassis groaning with a sound of tortured metal. I slammed on the brakes only when the front bumper was inches from the concrete wall of the maintenance bay. The bus skidded to a halt with a final, shuddering screech. Silence. The engine idled, a low, panting rumble. The need to run, to flee, was gone. Suddenly, the adrenaline vanished, and my body turned to jelly. I started shaking uncontrollably, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they'd crack. A security guard, it was Bill, a heavy-set guy a few years younger than me, came jogging out from the office, a big maglite in his hand. He looked more annoyed than concerned. "Frank, what the hell, you trying to redecorate the place?" he shouted as he got closer. I couldn't answer. I just fumbled with the door lever. It took me 3 tries before the hydraulics hissed and the doors folded open. Bill's face was right there, his expression changing from irritation to alarm as he saw the state I was in. "Jesus, Frank, you're white as a ghost. You okay?" I think I tried to speak, but all that came out was a wet, gasping sound. I pointed a trembling finger up, towards the roof. He was on the roof, I finally managed to choke out. On the roof. Tried to get in. Bill's face was a study in confusion. Who? What are you talking about? I tumbled out of my seat and onto the pavement, my legs giving way. Bill caught me before I hit the ground. I was a mess, just a blubbering, shaking old man, trying to tell him about the man on the roof, the face in the windshield, the pounding, the smile. I wasn't making much sense. I kept babbling about the call button. It's still on, I repeated, over and over. The light, it's still on. To his credit, Bill didn't dismiss me. He helped me into a chair in the security office, got me a cup of water that I couldn't hold without spilling, and he called the police. To be honest, the next part is a blur. 2 officers came. They were young, professional. They listened patiently while I tried to tell the story again, my voice cracking. I could see the look they shared. They thought I was a stressed-out old man who'd had a panic attack or seen a shadow in the rain. I saw it in their eyes. They were trying to be gentle. So, this person, the taller officer said, his pen hovering over his notepad. You didn't get a good look at him? He was upside down, I said, and I heard how insane it sounded. His face, he smiled at me. He was trying to break the glass. The officer nodded slowly. Okay, Mr. Miller, we're just going to take a look at your bus, all right? Bill went with them. I just sat there, wrapped in a coarse blanket somebody had found, staring at the wall. I felt defeated. They'd find nothing. They would write it up as a hallucination, recommend I take some time off, maybe see a doctor. The story would be that old Frank Miller had finally cracked after 30 years of driving the same damn route. But then Bill came running back into the office, his face pale. The 2 officers followed him, their expressions completely changed. The skepticism was gone. In its place was something else. A hard, serious concern. Frank, Bill said, his voice low. They found them. Found what? The scratches, the tall officer said, taking over. He squatted down in front of me so he was at my eye level. There are deep gouges all over the roof of your bus, right above the driver's cabin. Long, deep ones, like someone was dragging their fingernails across the metal. And the emergency hatch you mentioned? The one in the back? I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The hinges are bent, he said. The latch is broken. Somebody definitely pried it open from the inside. We don't think you imagined anything, Mr. Miller. We think you're telling the truth. The validation didn't feel good. It wasn't relief. It was a cold spike of terror, a confirmation that the nightmare had been real. They took more statements. They dusted for prints. They took pictures of the star-shaped crack in the upper windshield and the deep, ugly scrapes in the paint on the roof. They even noted the still glowing call button in their report. Eventually, they sent me home in a squad car around 4 a.m., telling me they'd be in touch. My wife, bless her heart, didn't ask too many questions. She just held me while I shook. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, seeing that upside-down smile every time I closed my eyes. The next morning, I got a call from the depot manager. He told me to take as much time as I needed. He said they were reviewing security protocols. He was trying to be reassuring, but it all sounded like hollow corporate speak. The world felt different now. The familiar rumble of a passing truck made my heart leap into my throat. The world was no longer a safe, predictable place. I went back to the depot that afternoon. I don't know why. I think I just needed to see the bus in the daylight. I needed to prove to myself that it was just a hunk of metal, that it couldn't hurt me. It was parked in the back of the maintenance bay, cordoned off with yellow tape. It looked so ordinary, harmless. A young woman from the cleaning crew, Maria, saw me standing there. She looked nervous. Mr. Miller, are you okay? She asked gently. I'm fine, Maria, just looking. She hesitated, then said, we were cleaning your bus. The police said it was okay to clean the inside. We found something. We thought it might be yours. She held out a piece of paper. It was folded up, grimy, and damp around the edges. I took it from her. It was a bus route map. My route, Route 17, the kind we keep a stack of for passengers. It was jammed way down in the back seat, she said. The very last one on the right, where you said he sat. A cold dread, entirely different from the panic of the night before, started to creep up my spine. This was a slow, intellectual fear, the fear of understanding. My hands were trembling again as I unfolded the worn paper. The map showed my entire route, from the downtown terminal to the last, desolate stop where he'd gotten on. Several of the stops were circled in red. Red, like the goddamn call button. And next to the circles there were little, handwritten notes in the same sloppy, red ink. My eyes scanned the paper, trying to make sense of it. Beside a stop near the community college, a note said, "Female driver, short hair." Fail. My blood ran cold. That was Brenda. She'd been complaining for a week about some creep who kept ringing the bell and then not getting off, but she'd scared him off by threatening to call the cops. Fail. A few stops later, near the old mill, another circle. The note beside it was different. Young driver, headphones. Success. Success. The word hung in the air. It wasn't a word of violence. It was a word of accomplishment. A checked box. What did it mean? I thought of Kevin, the young part-timer who sometimes filled in. He always had his earbuds in, lost in his music. He hadn't shown up for his shift in 2 days. The depot just thought he'd quit without notice. But the word on the map wasn't quit. It was success. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I knew what I was going to find before my eyes even got there. I looked at the last stop on the route, the one in the middle of nowhere. It was circled in red, just like the others. And beside it, a fresh note, the ink still seeming darker than the rest, as if it had been written just last night. It read, "Old driver, careful." Almost. I just stood there, in the quiet of the maintenance bay, the smell of diesel and grease in the air. The sounds of the depot faded away. All I could see were those words. Old driver, careful. Almost. It wasn't a random attack by some lunatic. It was a plan, a checklist. I wasn't a victim of circumstance. I was a target, a name on a list, assessed and judged by some thing that was hunting us. My survival wasn't a victory. It was a temporary reprieve. A fail on his scorecard. He had almost succeeded. And the word, success, next to Kevin's name, it wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a declaration, a trophy. It meant that not everyone was lucky. Not every driver got away. And looking at that crumpled, horrifying map, I knew a truth more terrifying than any face in a windshield. The hunter was still out there. And he still had his list.